in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. What you're seeing is a Dalkon shield. The Dalkon shield is just one of many intrauterine contraceptive devices used by approximately 3 million American women to prevent pregnancy. The use of the IUD has become quite controversial in recent months. With me to discuss the IUDs and the controversy are Marcia Greenberger, an attorney with the Women's Rights Project of the Center for Law and Social Policy in Washington, D.C., and Dr. Richard Dickey, Director of Reproductive Endocrinology at L.S.U. School of Medicine. He is also chairman of the advisory panel of the Louisiana State Family Planning Program, and he's a member of the Food and Drug Administration's Advisory Committee for Obstetrical and Gynecological Devices. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Let's talk for the first few minutes about the Food and Drug Administration and how IUDs are regulated and who's responsible for that.
Well, at the moment, the Food and Drug Administration is responsible for regulating IUDs. And the system that is now in effect is that the majority of IUDs that are on the market today have been classified by the FDA as devices. And that means that they're allowed to go on the market without any pre-market review by the FDA to be sure that they're safe and to be sure that they're effective before they're allowed to be used by women. There is an exception. There are certain IUDs which FDA has classified not as devices but as drugs, and those IUDs are IUDs which contain copper. They're copper T and copper 7, and also IUDs, none of which are marketed at the moment, but IUDs which contain hormones. And before those types of IUDs are put on the market, FDA is required to review them and make sure that they're safe and make sure that they're effective. And only upon a finding that they are safe and effective will they be allowed to be marketed. There's an obvious serious problem since the majority have not been subjected to this pre-market review, and then we see over and over again what's just happened recently with the Dalkon shield, and that is that many hundreds of thousands and even millions are distributed to women, and women are using them across the country. And then we find out there are all kinds of dangers and all kinds of problems, and we find out there may be even more problems and dangers that we don't know about. And it's found out, unfortunately, too late, and women have suffered the consequences.
You were on a Food and Drug Administration committee. What did the committee have to say about this?
The committee about the Dalkon shield in particular was asked to review the evidence for problems with the Dalkon shield and to, from this evidence, make recommendations to the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration about any action that he might take on the Dalkon shield. And we have done that review at this time, and we've made our recommendations to the Commissioner. And the principal part of our recommendation is that with regard to the Dalkon shield, a moratorium ought to remain on its not only its sales, but that it ought to also be no longer inserted into any patients, even though some have already are on the shelf in doctors' offices and clinics. We have not recommended that it need be removed from any woman who's wearing it successfully. But a second part of our recommendation, and the committee feels this is very important, is that there needs to be additional scientific studies done concerning the side effects of IUDs. We now realize that these are not as innocuous as apparently once was thought. And certainly the committee strongly supports the idea of having these under some sort of review and investigation before new IUDs are put on the market, and also to investigate those that are presently being used without disturbing the fact that many women are wearing these and doing so quite well.
Yeah, I do understand that the committee had made a recommendation that all IUDs should be subjected to review for a clearance for safety and effectiveness before they're put on the market.
All future IUDs, yeah. And there are at the present time at least 6, possibly more, IUDs under development that the manufacturers wish to introduce on the market within the space of, well, as soon as they can, within the next year, certainly. And we feel that in the future, IUD should undergo some more rigorous type of investigation. We want to know specific things about how effective are they, that is, how often does pregnancy result when they're in use, are there a particular number of side effects such as the cramping and bleeding, infection, what is the outcome of pregnancy? If a woman becomes pregnant with her IUD in place, what is the result for that pregnancy? And we do not have that information for new IUDs or for those that are already in use, and this has been a problem.
It's not just simply a matter of reclassifying the IUDs that are now classified as devices as drugs, is it, or is it that simple?
Well, that certainly would be a major step forward as far as we're concerned. I think, although it seems simple to, in the sense that all would be reclassifying, what would go into the reclassification would not be all that simple. It would mean that the manufacturers would have the burden of coming forward and establishing that the particular IUD that they want to market is safe and that it's effective and how effective it is. And that they would have the burden of producing all this evidence, and right now we don't have the evidence for many of the IUDs which are on the market.
Is it a matter of the Food and Drug Administration not having the clout to enforce this?
Well, the law, in my view, certainly is pretty clear that they do have the authority under present legislation to classify all IUDs as drugs. For instance, the Food and Drug Administration has classified soft contact lenses as drugs. It may seem as if drugs is everybody has in mind a relatively defined sense of what drug means. It means something that you have injected into you, or you take a pill or something of that sort. And an IUD seems like it could be a device. However, really the law has been, and the Supreme Court in particular, has looked at the purposes of classifying something as a drug or device, and has recognized that the whole purpose of the Food and Drug Administration is to protect the public health. And the best way of protecting the public health is if something is classified as a drug, because it means the Food and Drug Administration makes sure that it's safe and effective before the public can use it. And therefore the Supreme Court said in a decision that if there's any question, if there's a gray area, the Food and Drug Administration has the authority to classify something as a drug, because we want to be sure that the public health is being protected. And so things like soft contact lenses have been classified as drugs so that they can be tested before they're put on the market.
Do you know the reason why the IUDs were not classified as drugs? The ones that do not contain copper?
No, the IUDs certainly are used inside the body, inside the uterus. They are there for a number of years once they're placed inside. It appears to be an arbitrary decision at some point that will not classify these as a drug, but call them a device. Now, the idea behind this is that there should be legislation for devices.
Is there legislation pending?
There is pending legislation. It has been pending for several years, and it did pass the Senate, I believe, last year, but was not passed by the Congress. It's not just IUDs as a device that are not regulated, but no devices are regulated. Heart valves are not regulated, pacemakers, X-ray machines. All these devices certainly need regulation as to their safety and also as to their effectiveness before they are placed on the market and sold to doctors for use in patients.
I might say that with regard to the IUD, to get back to it, FDA's refusal to classify many IUDs as drugs is especially mysterious, since they've made the determination that those that contain copper are classified as drugs, because it's been shown that copper does affect the body in special ways. And the Dalcon Shield in particular is not classified as a drug. It has been put on the market without the pre-market clearance review of FDA, yet it does contain copper as well. And as I understand it, the copper does affect a woman's body, just as it does in the case of the IUDs that have been classified as drugs. So I'm certainly at a loss to explain why FDA has taken the action that it has.
So then really we can't blame physicians for not passing on information, because they're probably not getting the information.
Well, you bring up a very good point as to how does the information get out about problems that we have or about effectiveness. devices of any sort, but we'll take the IUD in particular. It has, to this time, mostly come from drug detail men and from the manufacturers themselves. And there has been no criteria that they have scientific accuracy in the claims they make for their particular products. And we've seen that claims have been originally made which were not held up and had to be modified over time. And as additional devices were used, it's found that they weren't as effective or as free from side effects as was originally thought. Now, that's not possible with a drug because its effectiveness of a drug and its side effects have to be well known before it can be prescribed by physicians for the use of patients. I feel certain that physicians are doing their best to pass on the information they have, but they often simply don't have the information because it was not gathered to begin with. There was no requirement for it. Because once it is gathered, it's not necessarily disseminated, and this has been a problem for the physician. It's also a problem for the patient. If the physician doesn't know when the patient goes there to him with a problem, it's even a greater problem for her. And we have felt, many of the members of this panel and the other OBGYN panel on drugs have felt that there ought to be increased consumer information, that we ought to have brochures informing patients of how effective their device or their drug is and what its side effects are. And that the patient should have this in her hands, that a woman should have this when she goes to her doctor, so that...
before she's to have the IUD inserted,
well, certainly
right?
before.
Long before.
She should be fully informed. No one can give informed consent if they don't know the facts about the case. And to have an IUD inserted, one would think that you'd want to give informed consent for this.
Marcia, your group has some specific recommendations about information that's to be passed on to the patient. Do you want to talk about that?
We've represented several national women's rights organizations who have been very concerned with women's health issues.
There's one in California, isn't there, that's been doing a lot of work on it?
And there is one in California, the California Coalition for Medical Rights for Women, which is a coalition of many, many different organizations, women's rights organizations, health organizations, consumer organizations, some religious organizations who have seen the problems of women who have been given medical care but who have not been given information that they must have before they can decide for themselves whether it's care that they wish to have. And in fact, the law does require that a patient be fully informed of the risks and benefits of a particular kind of treatment or a particular drug or contraceptive device before the woman agrees to use it. And it's especially important in the area of contraceptives because really only the woman knows how important it is to her to avoid a pregnancy and how important it is to assume certain risks with a particular contraceptive. And unfortunately, right now, we're at a state where there really are trade-offs, and the most effective contraceptives may be ones that have the most serious health risks involved. And often, I think the assumption has been made that the best contraceptive is the contraceptive that is the most effective. But perhaps that might not be the case for a particular woman. Perhaps if she knew what those health risks were, she may decide for herself that she'd rather take the chance of using something that's a little less effective.
Can you be a little bit more specific about, do you want a sheet, an information sheet of side effects, of warning signals?
Yeah, well, we have made some concrete suggestions to the FDA concerning labeling and warnings that we think ought to be required to be given out before any woman agrees to use an IUD. And what we've suggested is that she get 2 pieces of paper. One would be, in relatively brief form, a list of the benefits of an IUD, the risks of using an IUD, the effective rates of IUDs as compared to other methods of contraception, and also a description of some of the risks and benefits of the other methods, like the pill, for instance, and diaphragm, and some of the risks and benefits of becoming pregnant or having an abortion, so that she can have some basis upon which she can balance a choice of an IUD against a pill, against a diaphragm, against taking her chances in becoming pregnant or relying on abortion, for instance, to solve an unwanted pregnancy. And we've also listed some information that we think a woman ought to have about the specific kinds of physical conditions that she might have which would warn her not to use an IUD. And then we've suggested that that piece of paper, which lists all the basic information that anybody should have, be signed by her. And we think that it's sort of like a consent form, and often one does that when we go into the hospital, so that we be sure that she's read it and there's some, she's asked any questions and she understands it and she's decided for herself that she wants to use it. And we also suggest that she be given a little pamphlet to take home with her if she has an IUD inserted that will repeat some of the information about the risks and benefits, but also give her some warning signs to look out for, give her the name of the IUD that she's got. One of the big problems now is that many women hear, for instance, about the problems of the Dalkon Shield, and they're not sure. They know they have an IUD, but they're not sure if they have a Dalkon Shield or another type. And they don't know what to go back and tell a doctor they've got, and they, maybe that they can't get in touch with the original doctor who inserted the thing. So we think that there ought to be the name, there ought to be warning signs, what to do in case, when to call your doctor, how often you should see the doctor, and some of the descriptions of risks and benefits, so that in case you need
Let's get into some of that specific information now, but let's begin. Perhaps you would show us some of the IUDs we have on the board there and explain them.
Okay, Sandy. Let me start and go back to the Dalkon Shield that you saw originally, and you'll notice that it is approximately the size of my thumbnail, to give you some perspective of how large a intrauterine device is. This is the small Dalkon Shield meant for the woman who's never been pregnant, and this is only slightly larger meant for the woman who has been pregnant. And the Dalkon Shield is different from other devices because of the membrane across its surface, because of these little spicules which surround it and which prevent it from being expelled easily. Over here is the first IUD, the coil. This is no longer manufactured, but you can see how the name coil got attached to the intrauterine device from the spiral type effect. In a large part of the board here we have the Lippes loop, which is very commonly used and is one of the three most common IUDs. There are a number of Lippes loops. If we progress across the Lippes loops, we see a Bernberg bow, which is one of the devices that was formerly on the market and now discontinued because of a large number of perforations. Down at the bottom of the board are the double coil or safety coil, which is also currently widely used. And you notice one of the safety coils beneath my finger here is sort of distorted and bent. It has been in a uterus, and this is what will happen to an IUD while it's in place. Up here is a historical intrauterine device. This is the very first type of intrauterine device used. It's made out of silk, and it was invented in 1909. And IUDs have been used since 1909, first in Germany, later in this country. These are some of the old silver ring type of devices that were used in the 20s and 30s. And up at the top is the copper 7, which now has copper wrapped around it, and the copper T, which is not yet on the market, but which will be within probably sometime this year.
The copper 7 is the latest device, right?
That is the latest device, and employs copper to increase its effectiveness.
Now, have those been tested before they were put on the market?
No, not to a great extent. To some extent, all devices have had some clinical testing. Otherwise, a manufacturer would not try and sell it, but sometimes less than 2,000 or 10,000. The copper 7, though, did have to undergo testing because it has a copper in it and is considered a drug. So it underwent scientific investigation type of testing before it was marketed. I think we should use a little bit of our time to talk about side effects and effectiveness. And the only way to do this is to put the intrauterine device in terms of the comparison with the pill, the other effective, highly effective method, and both of these in terms with the risk of problems in pregnancy. And if we start with pregnancy, we know that in this country, out of 1 million women who become pregnant, about 188 will die of some complication of pregnancy. If a woman were to use an IUD, 4.4 women out of each million would die of some complication related to the intrauterine device. If a woman were to use pills, somewhere between 20 and 45 women out of each million pill users might possibly die as a side effect. The pills then are 15 times safer than becoming pregnant, and the IUD would be nearly 60 times safer than becoming pregnant. Now, the figures on the pill are going to improve because of new developments and lower dosage in the pills. The figures on the IUD will possibly improve also as we begin to get some more investigations and find out what exactly are causing the problems with different IUDs.
Although I have heard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that those statistics can be a little misleading about how safe it is, for instance, to use the pill, because many women who have physical problems are sorted out as not candidates for use of the pills. And so it's the more healthy women who traditionally have been given the pill. And women in general, of course, healthy or not, often become pregnant. So that we're sort of comparing a more healthy population with the population at large and comparing pill users versus people who become pregnant in general.
Well,
and I know some doctors have attacked some of the claims of safety for the pill on that basis.
Some of the doctors who attack claims for safety of the pill particularly vigorously back in the Senate investigations a few years back were also trying to market their own IUDs. I think that's something that we should remember. The side effects of the IUD have been generally passed over and not considered. And the principal side effect, of course, is that you can become pregnant with an IUD, that the effectiveness is about 97% to 96%, that is between 3 and 4% of women, or 1 out of 25 to 1 out of 30, will become pregnant each year that they wear an IUD. Now, with the pill, the pregnancy is nearly zero. If you use the pill every day, you won't become pregnant. If you use the IUD every day, your chances are that you could become pregnant, 3 to 4%. However, many women do not realize that they can take that risk of pregnancy with the IUD down almost to the pill level by using a second method. And in this regard, they should use foam. This has been often recommended in large Planned Parenthood groups, but not very often by private doctors, I'm afraid, that if you use a foam along with the IUD, the effectiveness of foam is 85%, and then your risk becomes much less with the IUD, the risk of pregnancy. The other side effects of the IUD are bleeding and cramping, which occur in about 25% of women after it's inserted. These necessitate removal of the IUD in about 12 to 15% of women. Intrauterine devices are also spontaneously expelled in about 10% or 8% of cases.
I just want to interject a question about the bleeding. You know, you hear a lot of women say that they had considerable bleeding after an insertion of an IUD, and they phoned their physician, and he said a certain amount of that is normal. How do you know how much bleeding is normal and how much is excessive, and when you should call your physician? Is there a way to tell?
If you can't stand it anymore, call the physician. No, it is you have to develop a tolerance for it. By normal, we mean that it's expected when you put a foreign object into the uterus. Now, if it exceeds the amount of a normal menstrual flow, or if it equals the amount of normal menstrual flow and goes on for longer than a normal menstrual period, that is excessive, because eventually you become anemic. Mm-hmm. It should become much less than that, and it should go away after the first or second month of use.
We just have about 3 more minutes. Would you go into the side effects, the warning signals, rather,
well,
just a little bit?
We haven't talked about about the problems of pregnancy. And as you asked about the side effects, the biggest risk that occurs with an intrauterine device is of infection during pregnancy if you should become pregnant. And I think it's important for everyone to know that the risk with the IUD centers principally on pregnancy. The risk occurs if you become pregnant. If you are pregnant with an intrauterine device in place, then you have a chance of dying as a result of an infection, which is something like 1 in 20,000 for all intrauterine devices, but for the Dalcon Shield, it may be 3 times as great of dying from a complication. For this reason, we recommend that if a woman becomes pregnant with an IUD in place, that she go to her doctor as soon as she suspects pregnancy and have that IUD removed if, in fact, she is pregnant. Now, if she is unable to have the IUD removed and continues with it in pregnancy, or if she chooses to not have it removed, then her chance of having a miscarriage or abortion are 50%. If she has the intrauterine device removed, her chance of abortion or miscarriage is only 25%. So it's much better that the intrauterine device be removed. And I'm afraid we still have doctors not aware of these statistics who encourage their patients to keep the intrauterine device in place if she becomes pregnant. Now, if she continues with the intrauterine device in place, then she must guard carefully against the flu-like syndrome, where if she feels like she has flu and has even the slightest vaginal discharge or odor, this may be the beginning of a severe infection, and these infections cannot always be treated with antibiotics, and hence we have these risk of deaths. There's now been something like 39 deaths from IUDs of all types in all occasions, and there have been 22 of these deaths, I believe, have occurred while women were pregnant.
We're completely out of time. I thank you both very much for being here. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Dr. Dickey. Thank you for watching.
Production funding provided by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.